Picture waking up one morning to find your entire neighborhood has moved 6 feet closer to the edge of a cliff. Not in a decade, not over years, overnight. This is the reality for over 1,500 people in Sicily right now, and what's happening beneath their feet might be one of the most terrifying natural disasters unfolding as we speak. Right now, in a town called Niscemi, an entire community is literally sliding into oblivion. Buildings that families have called home for generations are hanging over a massive chasm. The ground beneath them isn't just cracking, it's disappearing. And the scariest part? It's still moving. Let me paint you a picture of what 4 kilometers of collapsing earth actually looks like. Imagine standing at one end of your neighborhood and looking toward the other side. That entire distance, from one end to the other, has turned into a cliff face 20 meters deep. That's the height of a 6-story building. Now imagine 350 million cubic meters of soil just sliding away. If you tried to fill Olympic swimming pools with that much earth, you'd need 140,000 of them. The scale is almost impossible to wrap your mind around. For days, Cyclone Harry hammered southern Italy with rain that just wouldn't stop. Most people think rain just runs off into drains and rivers, but in Niscemi, something different was happening underground. The water kept seeping down, deeper and deeper, into layers of clay and sand that have held this hillside steady for centuries. Think of it like a sponge slowly absorbing water. At first, nothing seems wrong. But eventually, that sponge reaches its limit. On January 16th, residents noticed the first warning sign. Provincial Road 12, the main artery connecting Niscemi to the highway, suddenly collapsed. The mayor immediately evacuated 35 people from nearby homes. Schools closed. Emergency teams started monitoring the situation. But this was just the beginning of something much worse. 9 days later, at 1 p.m. on January 25th, the earth gave way. Not a small section, not a minor slip. A catastrophic landslide stretching 4 kilometers long ripped through the town. In geology, there's a concept called subsidence, where the ground slowly sinks over time. But this wasn't slow. The land dropped 6 to 7 meters in some areas. That's taller than most of us standing on each other's shoulders twice over. Here's what most people don't realize about landslides. They're not like earthquakes that strike and then stop. They're living, breathing disasters that can continue for days, weeks, even months. And that's exactly what's happening in Niscemi right now. The ground is still shifting. Every hour the cliff edge crumbles a little more. Homes that seemed safe yesterday are in the danger zone today. The scenes coming out of this town are surreal. There's a car literally suspended in midair, visible through a gaping hole in a collapsed building. Apartment blocks split cleanly in half, their interiors exposed like someone sliced through a layer cake. Underground pipes and electrical cables dangle from foundations like torn veins. It looks like something out of a disaster movie, except this is real. And it's happening right now. On January 29th, firefighters did something incredibly brave. They entered the red zone, the area marked as extremely dangerous, to rescue a family's pet parrots. These birds were trapped inside a home that could collapse at any second. Think about that level of risk. These emergency workers knew the building might give way beneath them, but they went in anyway because every life matters, even the small feathered ones. Niscemi's historic center tells a story that goes back over 300 years. Buildings constructed in 1693, surviving earthquakes, wars, and centuries of weather, now sit on a fault line that keeps widening. Baroque architecture that has stood since the late 17th century might not make it through this year. There's something deeply tragic about that. Structures that outlived countless generations could disappear in a matter of weeks. Gaetano Parisi and his family opened a rooftop bar just 5 years ago. They called it Frida. It overlooked the beautiful coastal town of Gela, offering views that tourists would drive hours to see. This was their dream, built with savings and hope and years of planning. Now that dream sits on the literal edge of a cliff, and Gaetano doesn't know if it will exist next month or even next week. Over 1,500 people have been forced from their homes. Think about what that actually means. 300 families grabbing whatever they can carry and leaving everything else behind. Most found shelter with relatives scattered across Sicily. 20 people are sleeping in a sports hall that's been converted into an emergency shelter. The town has established a red zone spanning 150 meters where nobody is allowed to enter. Police patrol empty streets that used to buzz with daily life. What was once a vibrant community is now a ghost town, perched on the edge of oblivion. Professor Giovanna Papalardo from the University of Catania put it bluntly. The situation today is repeating itself with even more significant characteristics. The landslide front now extends about 4 kilometers, dwarfing what happened in '97. Italian politicians are facing tough questions they can't easily answer. Why was construction allowed on known high-risk land? Why weren't the warnings from 3 decades ago heeded? Regional President Renato Schifani acknowledged these questions are legitimate. But legitimate questions don't rebuild homes or restore lives. To understand why this happened, you need to look beneath the surface. Niscemi sits on a plateau made of alternating layers of sand and clay. When these layers are dry, they're relatively stable. But when water saturates them, clay becomes slippery, almost like a lubricant. The layers above start to slide. Cyclone Harry dumped unprecedented amounts of rain over several days. The water didn't just run off. It soaked into every pore and crack in the soil, filling the ground like water filling a bathtub. As water pressure increased, the weight of the saturated soil overwhelmed the clay underneath. The hillside essentially liquefied and began flowing toward the valley below. Civil Protection Chief Fabio Siciliano described it simply: the entire hill is collapsing. Onto the plain of Gela, it's not a question of if more land will fall. It's a question of when and how much. Italy's response has been massive. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni took a helicopter tour of the disaster zone on January 29th, surveying the damage from above before meeting with local officials. On January 27th, the government declared a state of emergency for Sicily, Sardinia and Calabria, the 3 regions hardest hit by the cyclone. An initial €100 million, about $120 million, was allocated for immediate disaster response. But Sicilian officials estimate the overall damage at €2 billion. That initial funding is just the down payment. Advanced technology is now being deployed. Drones and satellites monitor the landslide 24/7, tracking every shift and trying to predict where the next collapse might occur. The Italian Space Agency has been called in to provide enhanced monitoring from orbit. This is the kind of response you'd expect for a major crisis. And rightfully so, because this disaster is still very much active. As of late January, 5 days after the main collapse, the landslide continues to move. The ground keeps shifting. The cliff edge keeps crumbling. Civil Protection Chief Fabio Siciliano was clear about what this means. If a house is on the edge, it cannot be occupied. These families need permanent relocation. More buildings are at risk. Another section of land could give way at any moment. And the rain hasn't stopped. More precipitation is in the forecast, which could trigger additional collapses. For the 1,500 people evacuated from Niscemi, the future is deeply uncertain. Some have been allowed brief, supervised visits to retrieve essential belongings, but only if their homes aren't in the immediate red zone. Cyclone Harry was no ordinary storm. Meteorologists describe it as one of the most damaging Mediterranean cyclones in decades. But here's the crucial connection. Climate change is making storms like this more frequent and more intense. As of right now, late January 2026, the situation in Niscemi remains critical and fluid. The landslide is still active. Civil protection teams continue monitoring around the clock. Rain forecasts for the coming days have emergency officials on high alert. The 1,500 evacuees remain displaced, uncertain when or if they can return. Italian officials are meeting daily to coordinate response efforts and plan long-term recovery. The European Union has offered assistance with disaster response teams on standby. This disaster is more than a local tragedy. It's a warning. Climate change is rewriting the rules of where humans can safely live. Coastlines, river valleys, hillsides, forests. Places that were stable for centuries are becoming hazardous in our lifetime. The question isn't whether we'll face more disasters like this. The question is, will we learn from them? Will we enforce stricter building standards? Will we invest in early warning systems? Will we stop developing high-risk areas? Most importantly, will we address the root cause, climate change, before more communities find themselves teetering on the edge? For the people of Niscemi, these questions come too late. Their homes, their businesses, their community, suspended in midair waiting to fall. The landslide continues. The rain continues. And a town holds its breath, wondering what will collapse next. If this opened your eyes to something you didn't know was happening, share this with someone who needs to see it. Because while Niscemi might seem far away, the forces reshaping that hillside are reshaping coastlines, mountains and valleys all over the world. And one day it might not be so far away after all.